Started. If everyone could silence their phones as mine goes off as a reminder. Go ahead and call the school board workshop Tuesday, January 29th at 4 o'clock to order, and I will turn it over to Dr. Pace and her team to move us forward.
Thank you, Chairman Thacker and members of the board, for this opportunity to share with you some of the work that we have been doing over the last 2.5 years regarding transportation and ways that we could be more efficient and effective in providing service for our students and their families. As you know, as a board, you have tasked us with looking for operational efficiencies that would potentially allow us to give more generous raises to our employees than we have been able to do in the past 5-6 years, at least, especially since I have been the superintendent. And transportation is an area where we spend a lot of money, about $20 million a year, and we feel like we have some potential operational efficiencies that we could gather that would also allow us, as I said, to improve service. But we're going to start with our most recent addition to the team in terms of director level, and that's Mr. R.B. Creech, an experienced transportation director, to kind of go through the proposal with you. And I also have Mr. Shapira here, our assistant superintendent for operations, and we'll be happy to answer any questions throughout the presentation that you might have.
So you want us to ask as we go? No?
I think I would today.
Okay.
All right. Thank you so much. Board members, Ms. Superintendent, I appreciate the opportunity to address the group tonight. So what I'd like to do is start off tonight with basically a transportation profile, if you will. So Osceola County is about 1,322 square miles. It's a big old place. You know, the ugly cousin is Polk County next door at about 1,500 square miles. I can say that because I'm actually from there. So
I'll say it too because I'm from Osceola County.
There you go. So we've got about 1,331 miles of paved roads, 405 miles of non-paved roads. Now, why are paved roads and dirt roads important? Because the unpaved roads actually are a portion of our funding formula from the state, and it actually gives us just a little bit more money that we get back to transport those kids. So the more non-paved roads we do, the better off that we are.
I don't know if the wear and tear that the P-Vine causes on our buses, if we get that or not.
We do not. I'll guarantee you. Those washboard roads just don't get it. That's for sure, sir. We have about 3,600 bus stops out there that we make twice a day, every day. We're running currently 310 buses on daily routes. We started out with about 325 when we first started the school year. So we've already found some efficiencies, and that's our jobs, and that's what we try to do every day, besides keep our kids safe on the way to and from school. We do about 6 million miles a day. No, we're about 6 million miles a year.
Oh, wow. It's like,
I was going to stop you
There
there.
you go.
I'm like, I'm not good at math, but.
We're all
6
paying
million miles.
attention. It's early yet.
It is early yet. Just give me a chance. I'll stumble again. So anybody know how many round trips that is to the moon?
A lot.
A lot. Thank you, ma'am. It's about 24, believe it or not. So we drive a long way, folks. That's what I'm trying to say here. 24 elementary schools, 8 middles, 10 highs, 5 multi-levels, and 2 alternatives. So, you know, when you talk about transportation, our costs are really based on, number one, labor, and number two, how we create those bus stops and the factors that go into creating bus stops. So one of those things is the number of bus stops that we have out there. We have 3,600. Every time we stop and start that vehicle, it costs us additional dollars. It's pennies, it's parts of a cent, but it actually adds up. The location of bus stops, where do we put them? Every elementary school mom in the world wants a bus stop right in their driveway so that they can see their son or daughter. But we can't do that. There's actually laws and regulations that determine where those bus stops are actually created. The length of the run, how far are we going? Kenansville, Yeehaw Junction, going down to Point Siena. Those runs, the length and the duration of those runs is very, very important. The number of students we put on those runs. Obviously, one would think the longer the run, the more students you put on. That may not be the case. And remember, it costs the same thing to operate a bus with one student on board as it does an entire bus full of 65 students. So that's one of the factors. Our attendance zones. How big are they? Are they district-wide? The high school zones are very large. The elementary schools are very small. And the middle schools are somewhere in between. So that's a big factor that we have to look at. The window of operation is probably one of the biggest things that we battle every day in keeping our costs down. And we're going to come back and talk about the window of operation in just a moment. Another thing that we have to really be concerned about is the length of the school day, because if you have varying lengths of school days, it sets those logistical factors askew, and it doesn't work in the overall scheme of getting kids to school every day. And the number, of course, of buses that we utilize on each tier. So what is this window of operation thing? So basically, it's the amount of time between the first trip and the last, and we measure it from the first bell to the very last bell. It applies to both morning and evening, of course. And a longer interval gives us more time to do what we need to do to bring our students in, run back out into the area, grab the next load, bring them in, and go back and do it again. So that window is very, very important. Some of the costs are fixed costs. Buses run about $120,000 each. They have a 10-year lifespan. We put them on the road for about 8 to 10 years, then we put them into spare status. We've actually got some buses that are 18 years and older. So, you know, they've already graduated from high school and they're wearing their caps and gowns out there. That's a fixed cost. Fuel's a fixed cost. I don't know what fuel's going to be, you know? I mean, yesterday morning it was one price. We woke up the other morning, it had gone up 20 cents overnight. It's crazy. So, and we buy our fuel off the OPUS market, so we can't hedge it. So we're subject to those fuel costs. Wages, we have fixed wages. We have a certain amount of labor that we have to pay. Maintenance, again, going into the buses. The older the buses, the more they cost to keep on the road, and the more parts and maintenance and wear and tear that we have to do on the buses. Some of our discretionary costs, eligibility. Everyone knows that if you're 2 miles or more, you get a bus ride. 2 miles or less, you may or may not. So there's some eligibility issues in there. We want to try to make sure that every student that we transport, we're getting some reimbursement from the state and making some money back for the district. Number of bus stops is discretionary. We can decide where we put those bus stops. You know, we can't put them in every driveway, but we have to make sure that we're doing it logistically, keeping those students safe, and of course moving forward with creating that run. Our deadhead. How far are we running those buses empty? Every time we run a bus and it's empty, it's not generating any revenue for us. It's kind of like being in the trucking business. Run an empty truck out there, you're not making any money, so it's costing us a lot. Most importantly, which is my last item, is the bell times.
And if
So-
I could just interrupt
Yes,
for
ma'am.
just a moment. You know, one of the things that Arby shared with us this week is the actual reimbursement, the FTE that we earn for students that we transport. We actually earn only about 48% of what it costs us to transport a student on a school bus. So it costs us about $900 per student to transport students, and we're getting about 48% of that back in our FEFP dollars for our FTE purposes, even with the unpaved roads that we have here in the county. So I think that's important also to understand that as a district operationally, we're paying 52% of that cost of transportation above and beyond the actual cost.
And then again, that's why the funding factor comes in, and all those little discretionary elements that are in that funding factor. The funding factor actually went into effect in about 1992, about the time I started my career in transportation. And in the old days, it was like the more buses you ran, the more money you got from the state. And there was no factoring in efficiency. You didn't get rewarded for that. Today, they actually try to pay you a little more the more efficient that you are, and the fewer buses you run, and the higher the load. That's why we try to maximize the number of students on those buses as well. So, you know, when we control bell times, it gives us the ability to multi-trip those buses. What we're after is, we would like to, in a perfect world, each one of our buses service at least 3 schools. Right now we're doing about 2.1, 2.2. That's not really good. You know, if you're running 2.6, 2.7, you're better in there. But 2.1, 2.2, because the bell schedule doesn't allow us to do that. So when that third tier hits, when those middle schools take in the mornings, you'll see a line of buses going into Simpson Road that they're done. They're not being utilized anywhere. But we pay a 6-hour guarantee to our bus drivers. So that's time that we can use if we could rearrange those bell times. Those are resources we're already paying for that aren't being utilized, because logistically it just doesn't work. So we want to maximize every dollar that we possibly can. We want to improve the on-time service for our students and parents. That's a guarantee that we try to make them. We want to make sure that if we say we're coming at 7:05, we're there within 30 seconds at 7:05. Now we know traffic and weather have things, you know, influence on that, but we want to be as close to that time, that advertised time, as we possibly can. It reduces stress for drivers, believe it or not. If they've got more time to live with students, they're less stressed, they're going to be safer, obviously. They're going to deal with the parents and deal with the students in a much better way, and they're not fighting traffic and worried about getting from one point to the next. So it makes for a better work environment for the drivers. Capital cost avoidance for bus replacements. Obviously, the less miles that we run, because we put the bell times in a logical order, less buses we have to order for replacement down the road. And of course, we reduce the deadhead time and mileage, which is money spent for nothing if we're driving empty buses. We ended the 2017-2018 school year with about 325 daily routes. We talked about that. We're doing 310 now. There's a cost avoidance of about $975,000 there. Now, that's not recurring. That just means that this year we're going to hopefully be able to make sure that translates back into the budget and perhaps something we can give back. If you actually looked at when you would actually have to look at the daily rate on those buses to really encompass what that's all about. But that's a big deal to us. If we're saving dollars, we're driving those dollars back into the classroom. We transport about 23,000 students each and every day. That's the students, folks, that we're getting paid for. We actually transport about 26,000. The difference are courtesy riders that don't generate revenue for us. It could be hazards, it could be politics, it could be road conditions, it could be that the CDC, the Community Traffic Safety Organization decided, hey, we don't want these kids walking along this sidewalk here. Whatever it is, we don't really, that's not a big deal to us. We just want to make sure our kids are safe. But it's important to know that there's actually more students on those buses than we're actually getting paid for.
I also think it's important on this slide to notice the current bell times, because that is where the disparity has made it difficult for scheduling things like professional learning communities, professional development, even sporting events and extracurricular events that take place after school. We currently have some high schools starting around 7 and some starting at 9. We have some elementary schools starting as early as 7:50 and some as late as 9.
Was that a decision based on the school itself, or why do we have such a disparity with start times?
And as you can see, the middle schools are 7:30 to 9 as well.
Yes.
Some of it is because of unique situations at the time. Some of it is because of folklore and legend over time, and it's just kind of always been that way.
So-
But the complexity of this then too is that in places like Michigan Avenue and St. Cloud, you have St. Cloud Middle School, Michigan Avenue Elementary School, and St. Cloud High School, all starting within about an hour and ending within about an hour of each other. So you can imagine what Michigan Avenue looks
Yeah.
like
Right.
most mornings, Monday through Friday, when school is in session.
I know.
You have similar challenges in Kissimmee, where Kissimmee Middle School and Flora Ridge Elementary School start and end at almost the exact same time, complicating things along Dyer Boulevard, with Kissimmee Elementary School kind of caught up
Yeah.
in the mix of that. You have the same challenges out in Poinciana and the Pleasant Hill area, when you've got Bella Lago Academy and Liberty High School right across the street from each other, and starting and ending within just an hour of one another. So that is one of the reasons why we would like to recommend to the board that we get to more pure tiers, so that you could have elementary schools able to start at the same time, middle schools at approximately the same time, as well as our high schools. That does complicate things when you've got our multi-tiered schools, our K-8s and our 612. So with those, we kind of fall into the middle of where it seems to make the most sense. Currently, most of our K-8s are in that middle school time slot.
Yeah.
Okay? So I just wanted to point out that that range has made it challenging for some time.
The 48% reimbursement we
Yes,
get,
sir. Mhm.
is that based on the 23,000 or the 26,000?
23,000, sir.
Okay.
So those other 3,000, roughly 3,000 are non-eligible, so we don't get money back from the state.
No, I get that, I just didn't know if you were,
It's not the whole 67, 68.
No. So, but again, the big issue here is that what you should be seeing is a definitive break in these tiers, 7 to 9, 7:50 to 9, 7:30 to 9. What you really should see is like 7, 8, 9. You should see some time definitely in it.
Standard.
We obviously don't have that. So what I'd like to show you next is something I'm very proud of, and I've been doing this job almost 27 years. And I've used a lot of different routing systems, and we've asked for bell time changes over the course of my career in various places. But I've always had to stand in front of the board and say, trust me, I know it'll work. I didn't have empirical data. I didn't have something I could actually show. We've got a brand new bus routing system called Bus Planner, and I'm very proud of it because it's state-of-the-art, it's new, brand new algorithms, and it actually, for the very first time, can model what we're talking about. In the past, you had to trust the routers. You had to trust their knowledge and trust their skills. But today, what I can show you is that this is our current arrangement. And what we're seeing here, the color bands that you see are each of our schools. So the vertical axis is the number of buses that we use every day, and the horizontal axis is the time of day. The width of the bands is the length of the bus ride. So in a true three-tiered system, what you would see is, instead of 2 multicolored volcano peaks, you would see full 3. But what we're actually seeing here is that this is our first tier in the morning. We have our break, okay? Then we go into this next tier, and we look at it and we go, wow, that's kind of weird. It's all convoluted. And you go, well, where's the second tier? And it's actually sitting right there. That's the little lump on the side. And then there's your third tier. And what that shows you is how it bleeds together because the times aren't congruent with what's important for that break. So the little hump in the bottom, this is our field trips and our life labs, and let's go back. This is our field trips and our life apps that we do in the break in between about 10 o'clock and 1 o'clock. Then in the afternoon, we take off and go do it again. So again, the color bands again are all of our schools. So here's our first tier. And remember that our time starts. In the mornings, we can start as early as we like. We can start at 4:30. We've actually got kids getting on buses a little bit after 5. It's ridiculous, but that's the way it works. It's a big county. That's why 1,300 square miles. But in the afternoon, you can see the races start when the bell rings on that first tier. So here's your first one. And then again, you get a second one, but where's the third one? Well, there's 2 right here, and there's 3. So again, it bleeds into each other, and that leads for a case where you have resources that aren't being utilized effectively and efficiently, and that's something we're paying for because of our contract and the negotiated 6 hours, but it's something we can work with and do a better job. So, yes, ma'am?
Oh, okay. I don't know if this is the right time to ask because you already went over this, but just looking at the different, the graph itself, it does seem inefficient. You said that we get paid based on inefficiency, on efficiency?
We get paid based on efficiency.
On efficiency. Okay, so do you know, how is that measured? What are the elements that go into that, if you can tell me?
There's a lot of elements.
Okay.
I can't break them out all individually, but
Right.
it's cost of living. It's the rurality, which is the dirt roads. It has to do with ABO, it's the biggest one, average bus occupancy. So that is huge. And they compare that against the number of miles that you drive, the total number of students that you transport, and the total number of buses that you have on the road every day. So it's a multifaceted, and there's actually a few more indexes that go into that formula.
Yes.
But the formula actually needs to be looked at again, because the formula was designed for us to crank the buses up in the morning, go to 3 schools, and go park.
Yeah.
It was not designed for district-wide transportation. It was not designed for life labs. It was not designed for all that custom transportation we do when you're running a handful of students on a big bus. It was designed to maximize utilization and pay the districts accordingly. It needs some reform. It
So
really does.
if we were to determine that based on changing the start times for the schools, we end up being more efficient, will this 48% be higher?
It absolutely could.
Okay.
Just changing the ABO, for instance, in increasing the efficiency by shortening the bus runs and adding additional students on each of those buses can actually change that factor. I'll bet very slightly.
Sure.
But every dollar counts.
Okay.
Every dollar counts. So, any more questions about current operational model? So we're proposing some new operational parameters. We would like to establish 3 true time slots or tiers. We'd like the high school to have its own independent time slot, the elementary schools, and then the middle schools and / multi-tiered. We're suggesting a 7-hour day across the board, and we're suggesting that the start times in the 3 tiers be somewhere between 7:20 and 7:30 for the high schools, 8:20 to 8:30 for the elementaries, and 9:10 to about 9:20 for the middle schools. The effective applied times we think are going to be, we would like to see at 7:20, 8:20, 9:20. Understanding, we'll have them on campus at least 30 minutes prior to that. Remember, there's a 30-minute statutory supervisory requirement for these schools, but we've got to get them there for breakfast. So that's how we build the routes.
And board members, if you remember, Ms. Castillo, you weren't on the board, but when I first became the superintendent, we did move toward those 7-hour days consistently across the district, because as I started looking at student achievement and ways that we could improve that, we recognized that some of our schools with the most significant challenges also had the shortest school days because it was not consistent. So we've been able to do that for the last 2 years, very effectively have those 7-hour days. It is longer than the state requires, but we believe that it really gives our students an edge in terms of learning, and our principals and teachers have been able to make it work with adequate supervision and that 7-hour day.
Talk to me about the high school being first. We hear all this research about later start times. Tell me why you have them first, or what's your...
You know, there is research that shows that the adolescent body needs more sleep, and the challenge is logistically, how do you really make that work? I was the principal at Poinciana High School when it started at 8:45. We ran into significant issues because of students who worked after school, not just to pay for their car or the gas or the fun on the weekends, but to actually help support their families, who also took care of little ones in the afternoon so that parents could work in the theme parks and other areas where their hours were late and were long. We also found that from an athletic standpoint, extracurricular standpoint, we had students leaving school an hour to 2 hours early to get to different events. And it was actually a recommendation of the SACS accreditation team, what now is Advanced Ed, my second year as a principal, that the district consider moving Point Siena to an earlier start time like the other high schools to help us in our efforts to improve academics. So that next year, the board did move Horizon Middle School, my dad was the principal at Horizon, to the later middle school start time and moved Point Siena up to an early start time. You know, part of me was worried at the time, will we have issues with attendance and tardies? We didn't. Our attendance and tardies were no worse when we had a 7:10 start time than when we had an 8:45 start time. So that is the reason why this district has traditionally chosen to keep those high schools in that first tier.
Some of the major changes that would be a result of the proposals if they were adopted is basically that Neo City High School would go from a current third-time slot to a first. Osceola High School would go from a second to a first. New Beginnings from a first to a third. Neptune Middle School from a first to a third. St. Cloud as well, first to a third. Den John is currently at a very late first, and they would go to basically a full third. Some minor changes. Zenith would have a few minutes here or there changed. Osceola County School of the Arts, just a few minutes here and there changed. And of course, we're bringing online Harmony Elementary School and Harmony Middle School are being factored in as well.
El Lago Academy would also have a pretty significant time change, but would put them in line with Westside K-8, our other K-8 school in the district.
So if adopted, the proposed changes would result in something like this. Let's go again, a computer model that in a vector plot. So what we're looking at, again, is we're looking at volcano peaks, if you will. Again, the color bands are your schools. The vertical is the number of buses, and the horizontal is the time of the bus rides. So what you see is the first route, and you have your break, and you go, wow, where's my other two peaks? They're not there. Well, here's your second, and your third is sitting right there. The reason the third is sitting there is because what happens is we have to tell the computer how many buses we're going to start with, so it has a finite number that it can calculate with. It can't just go out and find all the buses all by itself. But what it does is it gives us that third tier. What's mostly important about that is you'll notice that the tier is significantly less than even the first one, so it means fewer buses on that third tier. What is important about this diagram is that this red line denotes where we were. Everything in the white below the line is efficiency in time for the students, shortening rides, and also the number of buses that we use. So those are efficiencies that you're looking at, and it's modeled. It's the very first time that we've been able to do that.
Let me ask this question, because currently my kids ride the bus, and currently my kids are on my middle school children, so all the middle school children in Kenansville and Canoe Creek have to get on the bus really early because they have to go to the high school first. I'm fine with that. I mean, I get it. What are we doing then? Because talking about these rural kids, are we going to go to Yeehaw Junction 3 times?
No. We will continue to do what we do now.
Okay.
In that regard. Those very long-range buses will not change much at all.
Okay.
I mean, really what we're talking about, the primary drivers behind this is some changes for 2 middle schools in the beginnings, essentially, to realize these efficiencies. Everybody else is just a few minutes left or right of that time frame. But we will, unfortunately, I wish we could shorten those rides for your children. I really do.
My children's rides are pretty short, but they just happen to be
right
on the same route as those kids. But so really what you're saying is if you have the 920, because look, for all the emails received and all the conversations I've had, I'll have 3 kids in 3 different schools next year.
Right.
Elementary, middle, and high school. So I get it. But my 9 o'clock middle school time, if this change goes through, you're saying that those kids, those rural kids in the southern part of the county are going to be on the same, I'm going to assume, with the elementary kids? Or is it going to be, right, so it'll be middle elementary on one bus?
It will still be hub and shuttle, and we will combine them as we need to based on what the routes require. So we could end up with that. We don't know
Because-
until we get there.
Because I guess my point was, I was getting at is because your other window is elementary high.
Right.
And that's not, I think that's something that we don't do. I mean, look, when I was a kid growing up, we all got on the same bus, middle, elementary, high. We all got on the same bus and we rode to town. But I guess what I'm saying is it, are you going to put some elementary and middle school, or elementary and high together or not?
So it's been my experience that you can mix elementary and high. It's amazing. The high school students tend to become parents and look out for them.
I mean,
and it improves
I'm
behavior,
okay.
believe it or not. But we would never mix middle school and elementary. But we will
You
consider.
don't mix middle and
We
elementary.
should not, if we can avoid it. So.
So
just
you're
because
actually
the-
you're actually gonna put the elementary kids on with the high schoolers.
Potentially. But remember, our VPK kids have ridden with the high school kids
There you go.
forever.
No,
And I
I'm,
will
no,
tell
no, I'm
you,
fine with that.
those were
I just
my-
was wondering how that was
Right.
all gonna work.
As a
So-
principal, those are my best behaved buses when we had
Absolutely.
VPK kids in the front, because they did look out
So it'll be
for
the
them.
elementary kids that end up with a little longer day, because the high school kids have to get there by
Right.
7 o'clock.
Right.
So the elementary kids are gonna end up being dropped off at shortly after that.
Right.
And so
But
they'll
keep-
be there an hour before school starts.
But
to-
keep
to-
in mind too that, the board has asked us to see what we could do about moving high school start times even a little bit south of that 7 o'clock number, and this at least gets them to 7:20, as opposed to
No,
earlier
I'm just throwing it
times.
out there for my side of town, just gotta.
Yeah.
We generate about 33,000 hours of video on school buses every day that we operate out there. And I've seen some amazing videos where, again, those high school students just simply take over and take control and take care of those elementary kids. It's amazing, the transition they make. So I can certainly back up what the superintendent's saying from visual that I've seen. So let's move on. So this is our PM. So in the PM, it looks a little more like what I talked about. We got 3 distinct peaks. So what we're looking at is this, again, is the number of buses that we would operate. So we've got our definite break. Here's tier 2. There's our definite break. And there's our third tier. Anything in the white, again, are efficiencies and money that we can save for the district and drive those dollars back into the classroom. Some astute teacher at St. Cloud caught on that the third peak is slightly higher than the first peak. What happened? You're using more buses out there, my man. And I said, well, let me tell you again what happens. With this particular model, we tell the machine 310 buses. And that's exactly 310 buses, because that's where we're going to end this year, hopefully. So what it does is it says, I've got all these extra resources, I'm going to throw them in the third tier and use them. And what it did is it shortened these bus rides into about 10 or 15 minutes. So the actual efficiency is going to be somewhere in here. That's not actually going to happen, because we're not going to have 15-minute bus runs. So, but that's just the way the model works out. But you can see we've got that definitive break. What's important, again, is that definitive break between the 3 tiers.
But we do believe that this model shortens bus routes for many of our students. Obviously, the students who live in our ruralist areas are going to be on the bus for an hour. They're on the road for an hour if they're going to the grocery store.
Is it,
But for our local routes, we do believe that we can shorten some of those rides and make them more efficient.
can you
Yes, sir.
answer for me, because I'm just curious. I get that we gotta pick somebody up in Yeehall Junction, we're gonna pick them up in Kenansville on the way through, but then we make 32 more stops to kind of fill up the bus. Does anybody do smaller buses where they could pick those people up in 5 different stops?
I've asked
and
this
then run
question
from-
a lot in the
Run from
past.
Kenansville on in?
That is such a common question that's asked. So we operate
Hate those
anywhere
kids
from a
on a bus
65 passenger to an 84 passenger buses, and there's everything in between from a 71 to a 77. The issue with driving with school buses, the cost of your bus is in labor. That's where your cost is. So I could put them in smaller buses, but a smaller bus costs almost identical what it does to run a larger bus.
What about larger vans?
That's what I was talking about,
Like-
the
Okay, so-
transport.
I don't know if those are
And
legal or
that's
not.
commonly asked as well, sir.
Yeah.
So let's say that I put them in a van. Let's say that we can only operate 7-passenger vans according to state law. We can't have anything that's 15-passenger or above cannot, and you can't find a 10-passenger van anywhere. So you're really talking about a Dodge Caravan, that kind of thing, Aerostar.
That's it.
So I've got that driver, which is the most of my cost, driving 6 kids around. Now, we want 3 tiers, remember? So they go out in the first morning and they pick up 6 kids. Now, we want to go pick up 30 kids. They have to go back to the compound, pick up a 65 passenger, go back out. There's no time. So it's actually more cost effective. Even though those buses look terrible running around with 5 or 6 kids on them, that's only for 1 tier, or it might be on the way to do something else. But it's much more cost effective to still do that, because the second and third tiers, or maybe the in between, are going to be full. And I'm maximizing the utilization of that vehicle. Vans cost you money. They really will.
I've asked that repeatedly.
I've asked it
Still not-
for
still not
years.
convinced a
I get the
$30,000
same
van.
answer, and it's very logical, and you guys are the experts,
A big
but
bus costs.
I'm with Mr. Thacker. It still seems to me that,
Well, you could do it. It's just that you're going
Absolutely can do
to,
it.
but I understand.
But
it's
what
just
about-
gonna have to get more drivers to solve
No, I
that.
understand that,
Yeah.
but what about, the kid who spends almost 2 hours on a bus
Yeah.
because they're filling up a bus? So,
Right.
at some point, it's like, when do we
What's the
say,
trade-off?
when do we say an hour is enough time on a bus, or
Yes, sir.
2 hours? I don't know the answer to that.
The recommendation is 55 minutes or less through the state, through our state administrative code. The other thing about
How many do
vans-
we have that are well over that, or 55 or more? Do we know that, percentage-wise?
Most of our buses range somewhere between about 48 students and about 65, somewhere in there. I know that we
No,
have.
No, how many
How many minutes?
How many
minutes?
kids are over the
Oh, the
55?
average?
Yeah, or no, how many
Probably
kids
40,
are?
45 minutes is the average. Some are as few as 10. Some are as much as about an hour and a half. Really long range. But one of the things this will help us do is not have to do that, fill that bus up as much. It may give us a latitude to run less students, but when we do that, please remember, we get less funding because it's about the ABO.
Yep.
And vans will do that to you as well. Because they charge a van against you just like a full-size capacity bus. So it's 7 students on a van, and it's much better to put 7 students on a bus and then use it in multi-tiers because you get more money back from the state funding formula that way.
What is their rationale that you can't have a 15-passenger van?
15-passenger
Is it
vans have a
safety?
high center of gravity. They tend to roll over very easily. And
They've made changes in those vehicles on them recently.
they may have made changes.
Oh, they got
but
changed for 60 years.
They're also
before
not
they
crash.
reevaluated.
I know.
They're also not crash tested at the same level that a passenger car is, so they don't have the steel in the doors the way the passenger cars do. So they don't have the protection for the students, and so the state's outlawed them for many, many years. They're good questions, sir. Okay, currently this is these are our bell schedules that you see. The blue is what we're doing currently, and of course the black is what we're projecting or that we're recommending.
Here we go, Mr. Thacker.
And you can see that for the most part, there's not a lot of change, except in the 2 middle schools, Neptune and St. Cloud.
This is actually the high school page.
I'm sorry,
Yeah,
high
that's
school,
it.
you're right.
Questions about the high school page? You've all seen these before, but just, this is the elementary
It's a little
page.
different now that you're.
I understand.
And again, the elementary page, blue again, current, and the black is projected, proposed.
Questions about the elementary school page? Go to the next one.
And of course, last but not least, the middle schools.
I mean, we're essentially talking about major changes for really only about 4 to 5 schools.
One, two,
Essentially,
three, four,
right.
I mean,
Then John,
we're
St. Cloud.
talking about major changes for about 4 to 5 schools out of all the schools in the
6.
county. 6.
And those major changes on those 6 schools save us $2.5 million.
Somewhere between 2 and 2.5. It's about $65,000 a year to operate a school bus. So,
And it's 6 schools, because Bell should be in there.
Yeah.
Or something.
So, yeah. I just wanted to.
So we have a comparison for you, just so you see what the neighboring districts are doing. And what we've done is we've gone through and looked at Hillsborough, Brevard, Orange, Seminole, Polk, and Volusia, which are neighboring counties along the Aqua Corridor. And we wanted to show you what their elementary, middle, and high school start times are, just as a comparison to what we're proposing. The proposal that we're offering is pretty much the statewide model. And it's very successful and it's very efficient.
So, I guess stay there for a minute because, so essentially, we're the last ones to the dance here. I mean, really and truly, we're the last ones at the party.
Yes, sir. But you do what's right for your community.
No, I totally
Right.
understand.
Yes, sir.
But I guess you talked earlier about your data and your research with your logistical calculator.
Yes, sir.
So what about the research that we see here? I mean, we know that essentially every other student in Central Florida starts middle school after 9 o'clock. So what is the research there? How are they dealing with some of the things that we've been talking about? Middle school athletics, extracurricular things. How has it improved traffic in Orange, Brevard, Seminole, Polk County? I mean, do we have some of that data from our neighboring county, even if it's just anecdotal and just talking to folks?
If you want to switch to the next slide.
Oh, did I jump ahead? I'm
No,
sorry.
that's okay. This is just some support options that as we've been talking with other districts about things that they've done to make this successful, these are some of the things that we would recommend to the board that we consider. Obviously, traffic patterns are very, very different in county to county to
Sure,
county.
sure.
And Osceola County has its traffic congestion. It's just now a way of our life with the growth that we've experienced. And we're not saying that this is going to be a panacea for that, but we do believe that there's potential, and that's in working with our traffic committees, to say that if we spread some of these times out and you minimize the times on the road, that could be peace. And something that Chairman Hawkins, or not Chairman Hawkins, but Commissioner Hawkins, he's no longer the chair this year, said the other day that he and his neighborhood had decided to do was, either let the high school kids ride the bus as opposed to taking them every day, or if you still think you want to provide that car service for your child to school every day as opposed to bus service when it's provided, carpool in the neighborhood so that one car from the neighborhood is going instead of 5, which they have found very convenient and much more efficient. And he would encourage us to encourage our families to look at something like that. But Mr. Allen and Dr. Respis have been working with their teams to see what are other things that they could be doing. One would be a fee-based extended learning program that could be added to our middle school programs or expanded at our K-8 programs as needed. Not every school will want that. It would be about $30 a week for families, which we believe is very, very affordable. You'd have to have at least 20 kids to make it a viable option. If there are more, we would add more staff. But activities would include some of the same types of academic and enrichment activities that currently occur after school in our YMCA and 21st century programs. The YMCA does not offer a morning program. We have researched that. And our last 21st century grant program at the middle school actually expires this summer. So that's not an option, but it is something that our extended learning team under Dr. Respis' group is certainly prepared to add. They offer homework help, access to instructional programs such as Teen Biz or STEM, Brain Gym. There could potentially be opportunities for chess. We've worked with that successfully in our elementary extended learning. So a lot of opportunity there to extend employment for a teacher and a para who want to work that particular time in our extended learning program. The students would still have breakfast. Breakfast would be served starting a half an hour before that 9:20 start time. Principals, we have encouraged and would offer their extended learning opportunities that they typically have done after school in the mornings before school. And it doesn't impact athletic events, because currently our middle school athletic events have been scheduled at 5:30 p.m. So the proposed time change actually would free up some additional bus drivers to help operate those particular routes in the afternoon to transport our students to games. So we feel like there's support for our families that we would be able to provide.
Go
Go ahead. Sorry. I was just going to say, and you and I had this conversation, and I said if we're going to go this route, just like all the rest of the counties in our area, my biggest thing, because the concerns that I get from folks are, hey, either they own a business or they work themselves, they need to be to work. Are we going to have something in place at the middle schools where kids can be dropped off early? So if we have addressed that, I think it's a huge leap forward.
And what middle school kids have typically figured out, I know from my experience in Brevard, is that if I have an athletic event after school, I do my homework in the morning when I get dropped off at extended learning, as opposed to doing it after school or in the evenings after at a particular event.
We've got 80-something% of our kids on free and reduced lunch. They can't afford $10 a week for lunch or whatever it is. So we have 80-something% that can't afford the $30 a week,
And we do have a sliding scale for our extended learning programs.
and we still think it can pay its own way.
Extended learning is,
I mean, I don't want to save this $250,000 and spend it on,
right. No FEFP dollars go to our extended learning programs. That is an enterprise operation that's self-funded.
As long
Doesn't
as
make
it's
money, but
self-funded.
it's self-funded.
I actually do not mind providing that service even at a cost. I can be for it, absolutely.
Any other questions on this page?
If I may interject for just a moment, our goal, of course, is to get as many students as we possibly can to ride school buses, obviously for the reimbursement, but mostly because of safety. The American School Bus Council reports that a single school bus is about 32 times safer than the average family car bringing our students to school. And it takes almost 60 cars off the road, fully loaded school bus transporting those students to school. So it
if
saves
you
on
ever
the
ridden on
environment.
Ricky, that percentage would be much higher.
But it saves on the environment, keeps them safer. So some of our communications, some of the things we've already been up to. We've been out with the SAC cadre, principals meetings, new beginning staff, Osceola High School SAC. They were excited about going to first year, by the way. We've met with community after-school business partners right in this room. They talked about that's the taekwondo and all the ballet and all those folks that do after-school activities. We've talked with the dual enrollment folks and OTEC. Neptune Middle, we've met with their SAC. St. Cloud Middle, we've met with their SAC. Went to Neo City actually last night. Currently, we're scheduled to go to Denjon and Harmony. And what's not on here is also back to New Beginnings and also back to St. Cloud and to Neptune one more time. So.
And I think we would certainly go to Bella Lago if the SAC group there would
Good.
like us to come.
Good.
So I actually sent a communication to all principals asking if they wanted to come see their faculty or staff. So
Can you
then
tell
they
us,
started to hear some people.
tell us about your principals meeting, how that? I assume you had all the principals in and discussed this, you don't want to?
We did. No, we did it on. We did it at the leadership
Yeah.
initially, and I think the response was very good. I had a lot of principals come to me after the meeting and say, "Wow, that's a great that's great data. We appreciate the way it was presented. We really didn't know these things, and there was one or two that were concerned, and we listened to their concerns. Certainly, we like to address their concerns. So, to me, it was a very positive response.
But as you know, board members, one of our challenges has been with the bus driver shortage really has been getting our students consistently on time to school
Absolutely.
and picked up on time at the end of the day and then dropped off back home. Because of the overlapping, the bleeding, as Mr. Creech described, of those tiers currently, there's not enough time between a bus's first run to its second run to its next run. And currently, we're not even getting 3 runs out of about a third of our buses. It's about 2.1 instead of getting up closer to that 2.6, 2.7. That really cuts it tight if we have a bus driver who's out and we're having to split a run and another driver's having to pick up some of those kids. There's very little wiggle room in terms of making sure they get to the next route on time.
I've heard this since I've been on the
rainy,
board.
if
And I've
there's
actually
a
heard
traffic
it at FSBA
accident,
conference from other board members
You know,
from large counties.
it just really
It's
makes it
all across the
tight.
state.
And so that has been a challenge. Since we've
Yeah,
had
super.
Mr. Creech and Mr. Wheeler come on board, he's done some good work with the bus planner. We've been able to reduce routes and make some of them more efficient. That has improved dramatically, but that was the one piece that I heard loud and clear from our principals. If you can assure us that these this gap between tiers would help confirm that when you say you're gonna drop the kids off, you'll be there. When you say you're gonna pick them up, you'll be there. We're totally behind it. That's the way our principals felt. Because that's lost instructional time.
No, I get it, and I've probably been leading the push on Dr. Pace to find places to save money, so I'm just, my questions, while they probably sound negative or not meant, I just want to make sure we've turned over every rock, and I want to save the money.
Change is hard.
And when
We
I,
understand
change
that.
is hard, but when I do look at, you got 4 schools starting at 8 o'clock, and you're moving another one to 8 o'clock, and all of a sudden, the people who live in this district can't get to work, and they can't get their kids there, well, the other ones, and then the other 6 counties figured out how to manage it.
Yeah.
So while change is hard, I think we can get through some of that. There's one that I do have some questions with, but I don't want that to drive. And I think I'd rather have a different conversation about that whole issue.
So Dr. Pace, my biggest concern when we discussed this 3 years ago was, and it pertains to my district, was the Narcoossee and the whole St. Cloud High School campus, right, the Michigan Avenue area. And my biggest concern with staggering the start times at that time was, and in 3 years, the traffic has exploded in both the Highway 15 corridor and the Michigan Avenue St. Cloud corridor. My biggest concern was, if you have kids in both schools, whichever one starts later, you're getting the other one too at the same time. I mean, you're not going to come back 20, 30 minutes later. So, but I guess now shifting to what's really become the biggest issue on Highway 15 and Michigan Avenue, as you've alluded to, is traffic. So actually being able to get through these areas. So what do we have, I know we've talked about it, but what are our feelings and who have we talked with at the county when we actually truly stagger Narcoossee, where there's an hour difference, correct? And we truly stagger St. Cloud High, St. Cloud Middle, and Michigan Avenue, where there's an hour in between each one. Do we really have some good information, good data? Have we had good conversations with the folks at the counties and cities on the traffic patterns and the benefits of any of this?
So we have not at this time, but we have used our live GPS data from the buses that operate in these areas. So we've taken a snapshot of that. I personally haven't talked to.
I guess for me, what I'd like to hear, even if it's just, and I'm sure there's other situations across the county, but for me, I'd like to hear from, we know in the morning Neptune would be improved. I mean, we get that. Neptune Road, we get that, but Highway 15, you would think, just thinking about it, absolutely, instead of having a 30-minute gap,
absolutely,
having an hour gap would certainly make a big difference, and having that gap be back down to 8 and 9 instead of pretty much right 8. But I'd love to hear from some folks at the county and their perception and their beliefs on the traffic patterns and what will happen. And I think Michigan Avenue would be city limits, so I'd love to get some information.
The county asked to meet with me concerning what they called their short list. So they had 5 schools. Let's start off with Narcoossee being their #1 priority, for us to figure out how to get the traffic off the road and into the site. And one of their suggestions was spreading out the times between, not having all the kids arriving at both Narcoossee Elementary and Narcoossee Middle at the same time. So it does help a little bit, but our biggest thing is trying to figure out a way to get the cars off the road onto campus. But every piece of road that we add to a campus when Mr. Clinch is building schools is that much more money as well.
I understand.
But this does take the buses and spread them out over time in terms of the dropping off of the schools. And Randy and Lester will continue to meet with the traffic committee and share this particular data with them. A year ago, we moved Neptune Middle School 10 minutes early in order to try to help with that traffic because so many people are going to work and have an 8 o'clock start time. That was something we could do at no cost and no savings. It just meant that those buses went a little bit early. So while it impacted the staff and the students and they were really, really cooperative with that particular change, it helped a little bit. But I drive there or by it every day and you see that it's still significantly backing up. But we know that the major employers in the county, other than the school district, which is the #1 employer, would be county and city governments. 8 to 5 are traditionally those hours, so that moving something to a 9 to 4 kind of misses that, if even just by a little bit. So that's our reason to believe that would help.
9 is not as bad. 4 is pretty bad.
Yeah, now 4 will be
4's
bad.
way worse.
You're going to get it.
now.
You're going to get it in the afternoon. Certainly.
So for Neptune Road, we spoke today with Junior Davis Construction. He anticipates being done with that stretch of 192 through St. Cloud by August, hopefully.
It was
Of
originally
this year.
It was originally December, by the way.
Did you get a year?
Right.
Yeah.
So,
And then I said December 2019, or when they first told me December.
So hopefully that will take some of the Neptune, put some even more back on 192, but
Yeah,
we'll see. Because we got, 22,000 home permits out there somewhere?
Wow.
correct.
And I'm glad you mentioned that, because one of the things that's so important about this realignment is that we talk about growth. We're going to explode. I mean, Orlando's going gangbusters, everybody around us. We're the refuge, basically.
Yeah.
People come here to live and get away from all that noise and mess. and they perhaps work there and drive back and forth. So we're kind of like
Doesn't
the
really
veteran
work for
community.
funding school districts anyway.
But even if it will help to mitigate those additional buses that we will be forced to add in years to come to accommodate growth. So an alignment gives us more latitude with those resources to minimize that impact. Just something to think about.
So,
Going forward.
one more question
Yes.
then. So, just to go back to the, and not to hit on this too hard, but, so going back to the start times, you don't have to go back to the
All right.
slide, but for all the counties.
Yes.
We know they're all doing it. If you talk to their transportation directors, and I'm sure you do, because I know you guys have groups like we do, right?
Yes, sir, we do.
These benefits you laid out,
Yes, sir.
are these the exact same benefits those counties are seeing from doing?
I can tell you I've worked in 4 districts, and I was director in Polk County, Orange County, Brevard, and now here. So yes, we did. And so when I came here and saw the jumble of mixed times that we had, one of my first thoughts was, wow, we got to fix that, because we can do such better work and do a much better job of delivering our students on time, keeping them safe, and getting them to school. We can just get some alignment work done. So,
The 48% that we're working as our reimbursement, do you know what these other counties percentage-wise are running at?
somewhere in the neighborhood of 49 to about 52. Again, remember that larger counties cost more to operate. Orange County, for instance, their buses run somewhere in the neighborhood of 75,000 to about 80,000 a year to operate. In Polk, they're running somewhere around 60. They're kind of a mirror of us. Brevard was running about 58 to 60. So they're all logistically different. For instance, in Brevard, I had 178 miles of coastline, 7 islands, and only 5 bridges that went across to those islands, so I couldn't get there from here sometimes. I had to go down there to start. So just completely different, but they do recognize savings because of these times, and it does give them resource allocation.
But that is a question that I
options.
think we're going to try to get some answers to through the Central Florida Coalition, sir,
Yes.
under your leadership there.
Yes, sir.
What, just since we're there again and it came back to me, so we see Hillsborough and Brevard with that late high school start time.
Yes, sir.
What is their 3-tier system, or essentially, I don't see a 3-tier system, but I guess kind of in Hillsborough. But
Hillsborough's a little different. Hillsborough does something called a hub and shuttle. They bring most, because they're almost countywide choice in a sense, they literally bring their buses into these giant parking lots, and they blow a whistle, they close some gates, they blow a whistle, and all the kids switch buses, and then they go back out again. So they have a completely different logistical setup than we do, or most standard models throughout the state. So I can't speak to Hillsborough, but I can tell you that typically you're getting about 50 to 55 minutes between the tiers and the other districts.
So what prevented us from researching that? I'll just ask that question. From researching the 8:30 or 8:40 time
What do you, I'm
on the
sorry,
high school start time.
the length between the tiers? Oh, you mean, and, just prior experience, and Orange is currently doing that as well. Like I said, basically is prior experience with what worked and was a struggle with students, high school students going to that later time. But Orange County is fixing to undergo that discussion in terms of what it would be there.
Now, I know they're going to discuss it, I guess, you know, we've done the research on all this.
Yes, sir.
What would the research look like that would give me that?
Yeah, let me just add a piece to that question. The Hillsborough and the Brevard that have the later high school start times?
Yes, sir.
Has that been that way forever? Is that a trend where next year when you look at this, there's going to be 3 schools starting, 3 districts, and then 4, where are we going to be the only one that's upside down at that?
So I can speak to Brevard since it's most recent in my brain.
Yep.
In about 2006, they started the study. They actually made the transition in about 2010. They worked on it for about 3 years, and they sold it piece by piece. Prior to that, they were running 2 tiers, and they were able to reduce the number of buses they had on the road by about 50 by simply going to the 3 tiers. Sometimes I get a question too, is why don't we have all the schools start at the same time? Well, it's because I would have, instead of 300 buses on the road, 900 for 2 hours, and that'd be it. And I wouldn't have anybody driving, because nobody wants to
That'd
work
be
2
longer
hours a
than
day.
2 hours if you had 900 buses all on the road.
Yeah, imagine what the county would be like. But I can
No,
tell you that
I get
before.
that part.
Yes, sir.
I
guess
think the
that's
high
my
school
question.
piece is something that we need to look at, but that's gonna be a more,
Well, and I think Clarence
a
got to
deeper-
where I was ultimately going. If we know, like I said earlier, kind of the last one to the dance on the 3-tier system, but I don't want to be the last one when everybody has their high schools at 8:30 if they figured it out.
Yes.
I certainly would encourage, Mr. Shear, Mr. Creech to look at that.
The challenge is if we go to 8:30, that's gonna move that earliest time probably up. You're gonna, well, somebody's either gonna go 7:30, 8:30, 9:30, or somebody's gonna go 7, 8, 9. You see what I'm saying? You really need
But
that
what
hour.
I'm saying, they're doing 8, 9:30, 8:45.
I
Is that
understand.
just because it's a different funding formula over there?
It's geography for us.
Geography.
It's the
Geography
amount-
for us is the biggest driver.
Yes, sir.
We
Okay.
need about an hour between our tiers.
That's what I needed to know.
You know,
Long
that
distances.
45 to 50 minutes between our tiers doesn't work. That hour between our tiers allows us to cover the full geography of our county.
We have a long way to drive.
Sure.
Any other questions?
No, I'm good, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Creech.
Thank you.
Hold on,
Thank
don't
you.
go. I have
Yes,
a
sir.
few questions. So, just so I could be clear on this, the whole motivation of figuring this out is in order to, for the cost savings. And I think I heard you speak that can lead to wage increases in our teachers, things like that?
That is a driving force, you guys have asked me to try to find additional operational savings so that we can increase salaries more effectively than we have been able to do so.
My view is.
But I have to tell you,
I would like this all go to salaries.
a significant issue for me is the improved service and on-time delivery for kids. That has been a real significant challenge.
Now, the,
Lost instructional time.
all right, so we're moving, I just noticed that all the high schools are moving to way earlier times, and that goes against probably some of the trends that we've been seeing, at least in Orange County, bringing the high schools later, and the research that you cited yourself.
Only 2 high schools are moving to a significantly earlier time. And that would be Neo City Academy and Osceola.
And the others
The
Ours is
others are
moving back
moving
10
10 minutes back, from 7:10 to 7:20,
Okay, so they're all gonna be very early, though?
early.
7:20.
But we're making
7:20, yes.
gains away from that 7:10 time.
All right. So when you, Mr. Creech, when you developed this plan,
Yes, sir.
it was only after you developed it that you sought the input from the schools, correct?
We built the plan originally, then we went out to get comments and recommendations to go back and do some tweaking as necessary, yes, sir.
And it's a good plan. The only major changes were in about 6 of the schools here,
Yes, sir.
in this slide.
That's correct.
So you didn't really, when you sought the input from the schools after this, to present this plan, you didn't really get any, you said it was very positive.
Yes, sir, the leadership, when we went through it, and the bell times were displayed, and they had a chance to look at it.
Except for a couple of schools, 2 or 3 schools?
Yes, sir,
All right, and you're still working with those schools, correct?
absolutely.
All right, so from your original plan, have you talked to these schools, to the committees, to the principals, staff, to find out what kind of input and what the concerns are about some of these time shifts?
Yes, sir, we have. And again, we met with Neptune Middle. That's one of the big concerns for them. Also, St. Cloud Middle and then New Beginnings. Those are the 3 primaries that had significant issues.
Oh, very good.
So,
So based on those discussions and what you've learned, has there been any changes from what your original plan is to right now, what you presented here?
no, sir, there's not been any changes because New Beginnings, Neptune Middle, and St. Cloud Middle are really, they're non-negotiables. We will not save much in the way of revenue if we don't move those schools to the proposed times. New Beginnings, there's a little bit of wiggle room, but the 2 middle schools are kind of they've got to go, or this plan just doesn't save much in the way of money. Tweaking the times a few minutes for a raft doesn't do much at all. It just brings everything into alignment. But it's the major change that going from those major tiers that makes all the difference in the world.
All right.
You said with your conversations, you were going back to New Beginnings?
Yes, we
Did
are.
Okay, can you let me know when that is, so maybe I can attend? Thank you. Please.
So, just to get this straight, Dr. Pace, Ms. Creech, by saying taking one school out of the equation, look, my kids go to St. Cloud Middle, I get it.
Yes, sir.
By just saying, okay, we get it, we're gonna stay at, we'll just put you with a high school and be a 7:20 start time. It is your opinion, in your opinion, that would then, we would see the $2 million blow up.
It would shrink dramatically, sir.
But you know.
How dramatically?
Well, for instance, New Beginnings. So there are 19 buses that service New Beginnings. They only have.
Well, no, that's kind of an anomaly, because they're different. It's a magnet whole county, right?
Yes, sir.
I'd like to have a whole conversation about New Beginnings
Yes, sir.
some other
That's
time.
different. I think that's different than what I'm asking, which is more the St. Cloud Neptune type question.
Right.
So just saying those two, let's say both of them.
Yes, sir.
If you take both of them, in your opinion, and you say, okay, we're gonna put you on tier 1,
Right.
720, which would essentially keep them at the same time.
Mhm.
Where then you go from 2 million to what?
About $500,000, sir.
To about $500,000 in savings.
Yes.
So you'd be laying $1.5 million on the table,
Yes, sir.
What, wait a minute.
or taking it off.
How many?
Cost.
Taking it off.
Hold on a
Yeah,
second.
or,
I got,
right.
No,
I need to understand the numbers.
I'm not the chairman. You got to ask
So-
Clarence.
Clarence, may I?
Absolutely.
So here's the thing. So I don't doubt what you're saying. I just want to understand it.
Sure.
All right. So we're talking about how many buses we're talking about for St. Cloud, which is
About 16.
geographically close to the high school.
Right.
All right. So 16 buses.
About 16 buses.
To St.
Man, the
Cloud.
cost of 16
That's
buses
correct.
is not even like. I'm just saying that. We'll probably have to do this in a different setting. I really
Yes,
want to
sir.
see how that works out.
Absolutely.
It's
We've
kind of.
run some models with all the different scenarios.
Well, hold on. Well, I do understand.
Yes, sir.
Because, look, the changes that are not drastic,
Right.
the buses are not even changing that much.
No, they aren't.
Or neither are the drivers. It's only a few. So I understand why these are very, very important for your overall scheme. I
Yes, sir.
totally do. I just want, it's just that the geography in a couple of these
Right.
makes it, I kind of have the same, that's the same questions that Rick and Booth is asking, is that if geography is so close, why such a big impact?
And I can answer that question, I think, for you. So we talked about the 2.1, 2.2 runs that we're doing right now. So what happens is, by putting them on that true third tier, I now have all those drivers that would normally be going back to the compounds and parking and spending the next hour and 10 minutes or so that they owe us doing nothing. I can now turn those buses and go back out to get those students, and I don't need to add a bus to do that. It's already a resource that I can use. It's a resource that's out there now, but it's not being utilized effectively. So by putting them on that third tier, those buses now can be utilized effectively, and that means that's a bus I can take off the road somewhere.
Is there also an issue about the students, the high school student and the middle schools cannot be in the same bus or something?
There are no set definitive rules anywhere. Parents, it's been my experience that parents are concerned about middle school and high schoolers being together because of the age groups. They really aren't concerned too much about elementary and high being together.
Okay.
And we really currently have just a few buses that are transporting high school and middle school kids on the same bus to get to some of our schools. And that's where going to our most rural areas.
Correct.
Right.
Because now,
It's middle high. is-
middle high,
Yeah,
Middle high,
right.
because that's the one.
And but that's like one of the only ones
Yep.
that's doing that.
But middle high is
The ones that
okay.
go all the way out to Yeehaw Junction, it would be the ones all the way that are going out to the Deseret Ranch potentially. Because otherwise, once you get to Canoe Creek Road, once you get to Hickory Tree Road, once you get to, Narcoossee Road, those areas are now so congested. You've got a whole bus of middle
One
school
stop.
kids, a whole bus
One
of
stop.
high school kids without any combination. So it's not that we have that many buses that are able to serve high school and middle school kids to get that efficiency of saving in a particular piece. And if you take that 16 buses off the road just for St. Cloud Middle, and you wouldn't take all 16 of them off, but that is about $1 million in operation at $65,000 a pop. And then you add the ones from Neptune Middle School as well that you're taking off of the road for, maybe it's only for one extra route, though all of those buses can only do 2 tiers instead of 3. That's where the savings starts to either add up or not add up. Understand, status quo, we can continue to do if that's what the board decides to do. But what Mr. Creech and I are trying to point out is that if you're going to change, it almost needs to be a package deal to get to the operational efficiencies that we're talking about and the benefits that we've tried to share with you. The schools of an elementary school, middle school, and high school on a common tier has advantages from an instructional standpoint, from a professional development standpoint, all of those types of things. So that's just, it's, we did little tweaks my first year here to get us to that 7-hour day consistently across the district. We've done little tweaks this year to reduce routes and get to some greater efficiencies where we can. And as Mr. Creech and Mr. Wheeler and the rest of the team develop their skills on bus planner, we're going to continue to look for those opportunities to help us get better at what we do. At the same time, we have a critical bus driver shortage that continues, even though we've gotten better and we have a job fair coming up again. Still looking for great bus drivers, if you know of anybody. And we're going to continue to try to serve kids, but we want to try to get them there on time and safely, as most efficiently as we can.
So I'd just like to add a couple things that Mr. Thacker pointed out. I'd just like to go on the record as well as saying, if we are able to do this, if we do it, the $2.5 million, I want to see go directly back. And you said salaries, but I'd like to add benefits to that, just because we know how the cost of our health insurance costs are escalating. And so I'd like to add that there as well. I guess one question too, or let me say this. You know, I was against this back in 2016, and I still haven't made my mind up yet, but it was not presented in this way. The savings were not near as great because it wasn't a complete overhaul. So the savings were fairly minimal, and at that time, 3 years ago, even though traffic was getting worse, by today's standards, it was great. You know, by 2019 standards, 2016 traffic in Osceola County was like you're on a freeway compared to what it is out there today. So it was a completely different setup. So I was against it then, and I still haven't made my mind up here today, but I will say I have a lot more confidence in what's happening today. And I guess I'll finish with this. It's a question because I think we touched on it maybe. So we have a bus driver shortage. We always talked about that. Ms. Palmer's always had them drive a bus, I know, right?
I want to keep her in the house.
So, and if you expect my 2 high school girls to take care of all the little, no, I'm joking. They probably would. So essentially what we're saying is by reducing the need for the number of bus drivers with this system. Essentially though, we're just keeping the same number we have right now. Is that correct?
We
Yes,
wouldn't
sir.
be laying anybody off.
We wouldn't be
if that's
laying
what you're
anybody off.
concerned
Yeah, that-
about.
I would-
No
I'm
one
not
would need to lose their
Necessarily
job.
concerned, just want to know where this is leading.
Because that void is very real. Most of my staff in the afternoon are out driving buses because we have such a shortage. So when they're out driving buses, they're not doing the business of taking care of transportation, and it makes it very difficult when parents call. There's no one to take the calls, so it's exponential and it kind of builds on itself. So if I can keep them in the house, we can do better work because they're doing their work instead of driving the bus.
We're still shorthanded, but if
we're
we
still
can stay
shorthanded.
status quo, and each time we have a job fair, which is
Coming up.
once a month,
I always see
At
Ms.
least.
Krause up and down the road too.
we still continue to get less people showing up.
Right.
I get it, and certainly,
not picking 'em
but I
up.
guess to go back to that point is basically we have a number of bus drivers right now.
Yes, sir.
If this change was to go into effect, we wouldn't have to be out here getting billboards on I-4 and putting up signs at every school. You think we could almost maintain?
Well, I'd still like to hedge my bet, sir.
I mean,
And the other
I know you want to
thing is-
continue to
Yes, sir.
recruit. I get
Yeah,
that, but it
Walmart's
wouldn't.
paying $90,000 a year to drive a tractor trailer right now,
I know.
and I'm competing with that. So
The
I understand.
savings
Yes.
that we have projected here doesn't even take into account any savings that would occur as a result of a reduction in overtime because of the reduced.
That's not part of the
routes.
2.5?
No, that's
Oh, wow.
That's just the
routes that
operating
would
cost
come
of
off
bus.
of the road. That is, so if you add on top of that, the potential to reduce overtime from our current drivers or our management team having to drive buses just to take care of our daily needs, there's the potential for even more.
There's just no way for us to predict that.
Yeah, and you've got to be safe than sorry.
Okay.
Board, anything else? Getting a little tight on time.
No, we're good.
Thank you.
Mr. Creech?
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much. I want to tell you, I'm very glad you're here.
Thank you, sir.
In a short time of your tenure here,
Got a great team.
you have a great grasp of what's going on, and we appreciate it.
Thank you.
Chris.
Finally,
Studio. New beginnings meeting is tomorrow, 1:30.
Oh, okay, well,
Sorry about that.
no, it's okay.
Hey,
That's
tomorrow,
okay.
1:30.
you didn't say how much notice you wanted.
I did not, I was not
We were
clear.
gonna break this up and have you guys sit up there for the student presentation, or do you want to sit here and have the students present here?
Are we just giving them 15 minutes? What's the deal? Or is it during the board?
This isn't actually, this is another workshop.